All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about playing in key. Now, the thing to understand to try to make this real simple is the thing we had talked about before about relative major and minor. Let's address that. We already understand that if I'm playing in the key of C major, I can play any of those white notes because all those notes are in that scale and in that key, and we understand what that means now. So, what happens if I'm going to play C major and the music's written C major? Well, basically what that means is that I'm playing C major, that the structures are going to be based around the three major chords or some of those major chords in C. So what major chords do we have? You can play the major C, you can play the major F, and you can play the major G triad, the basic major chords and basic triad structures in that key with C. So in C, the root, the fourth, and the fifth interval can be major chords. Now, if I go to relative minor and I go down, so it's a relative minor, so you're looking at A minor, which is basically works out the same thing as C major, except for you're working around minor chords. So what are the minor chords in C? There'll be D. I can play a minor chord in D. I can play a minor chord in E, and I can play an A minor chord. Now, you're going to have to form those chords, and you understand how to form those chords now in the key of C or A minor to see how they're only going to be on the white keys. So now you understand, so I'll be playing C da 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 da, F da 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 da, G da 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 da, you know, whatever, and then I can play melodies that are major. They say it's uplifting, all right? And then minor, I'll be playing D minor chords, E minor chords, and A minor chords, and they say that's more downlifting or something, right? Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but the tonal qualities are different between a major and a minor chord, and that's what we're talking about. So basically what I want you to do now, and I'm going to leave this up to you, and I want you to go into MuseScore and form those chords in that key. That means open up a song in the key of C and to start out there to form what chords can you form in that key, right? So, and harmonies. What harmonies can you form there and what chords can you form there? And it's that simple. And not all the time does everything when you make a harmony, it doesn't have to start on C root. It just has to be using those notes. So I can play an E and have an A that's going to be a fourth as a fourth harmony there. And does that make sense? But it's still in that key. Does that make sense? So, you know, that concept's very easy to understand. I hope I pointed that out. And what I want you to do is the basic harmonies we talked about and the basic harmonies that you can do, what can you play of them in C? And I want you to write them down. And what basic triads can you play? It's very obvious. You'll find out that you're not going to be able to play augmented and diminished triads in those major or minor keys. It's not going to happen. You're going to be out of key anytime you use them. That doesn't mean you can't, but you're not going to be in key. And that to figure out where they are, what chords you can play. So I didn't give you that many chords, so I mean it's real simple. Like a sixth chord can be played from the first interval, it can be formed from the fourth interval, and it can be formed from the fifth interval. Now, where can you play a minor sixth? You find out, and you mess around with the intervals we talked about and how that minor sixth is constructed, where you can play it. Like a major seventh can be played from the first interval as the root, and it can be played from the fourth interval as the root, constructing that major seventh. And the ninth, you can do that from the fifth interval. You can form a ninth from the fifth interval that is just these notes and the tones that are in that scale and key. And like the dominant seventh is on the fifth again. You can play the dominant seventh in that chord from the seventh as the root with just playing those notes that are in key. And the half diminished, you can always play that on it's the leading tone, they call it, on the seventh interval. And you can play that one there. So basically, that's what it means when you're playing chords, when you're playing in key. And so that gives a real basic outline. But if you go back to those chords that we talked about, the basic chords and the basic complex chords to work from and to build from those two, and the basic harmony structures of two notes, then you can sit down and figure out which one of those you can use where. And you really want to read a little bit about that and look into that. But that's the basic concept. So even something real basic, then I'm writing something in C major. I play C major, G major, F major, da 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 da, C. You know, something like that. Or if it's A minor, I'm playing D minor, E minor, A minor, you know, whatever. Does that make sense? And then I can play tones in that scale, you know, that's in this key of C that, you know, any way I want. You know, and it's like there's all kinds of structures to do that, but just the basic concept of that's what it means when you're playing in key. So if someone says they're playing in C major, they're more than likely playing a lot of C major chords, F major chords, G major chords. If they're playing the relative minor, they're probably playing a lot of D minor chords, E minor chords, or A minor chords, or some of those chords anyway, and basing their structures around those chords, major or minor. And the complex chords we talked about, where can you play them in the key of C? So I want you to sit down and figure out where you can play those complex chords there. And you can also understand that, you know, it'll give you a real basic understanding of why I try to keep it real simple, is because a lot of times you're going to be dealing with those basic chords I talked about. The basic harmonies, the basic triads, and those basic complex chords, sixths, sevenths, ninths, dominant sevenths, and half diminished. A lot of your stuff's going to be really based around that stuff. So you want to know where you can play them in that key at what interval. You know, so if I'm playing the key of C, what chords can I play from the third interval? If I use the third interval as the root of a chordal structure, what chords can I form from that root? Does that make sense? And I hope I made that real simple, because that's basically what you got to do. And I can sit here and map this out for you, but I'm not gonna. I want you to play around with it, understand those basic concepts I just laid out there, and then investigate those chords at what intervals you can play them at as the third interval you're going to use as the root. What chords can you play there from using that as the root of whatever harmony and chord you're going to build? Can you use, a minor chord? Can you use a major chord? Can you use a sus? Can you build a sus from there? Can you do a sus harmony? Can you do a sixth, seventh, or ninth? And make notes about that, so that, and you will, in that study and mess around with that, get a basic foundation of what ones you can do there. So I just wanted to address that, as that's what it means to be playing in key, to figure out what chords you can play there. And I gave you some basics, and I want you to go find the other ones yourself, because you digging around on there and playing it on the keyboard and trying to form them and put them together, using a different interval as the root to basing a chord. Can you build that in the key of C? And we're looking at it from the key of C because it's real simple. You're not going to get confused by all the black keys and all that kind of stuff. Later on, as you understand it better and you start, you're going to be playing in the key of A or the key of B flat or something, then you want to have a little bit better understanding of, the basic theory behind it before you're sitting there trying to figure out how to form that chord from there. You don't worry, you'll get there, but understand it from there. It's really easy to do it from the key of C because it's all the white keys, and there's no way you're going to get confused by that, okay? So that's why I do it that way anyway. So I hope that answered that question of what we were talking about before about the relative minor and why that is and what that's purposes of that. And we also talked about what that means to be able to play. You've got so many intervals. You got the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh interval. What chords can you play with each of those intervals as the root? Because that's what you need to understand to play in key. I know I can play the C major. I know I can play the F major. I can play a G as a major triad. I know that I can play D as a minor chord with D as the root. I know I can use E as the root to form a minor chord in key. I know I can use A as the root to form an A minor and still stay in key. And I know that, with a sixth, I can do that from the first interval. I can do that from the fourth interval, and I can do that from the fifth interval and construct that chord with that interval as the root of that chord. And you already understand all these concepts I've said. I hope I've explained that very well. And that's going to take a little bit of work on your part. But I've learned that if you do the work from there and actually investigate that some and sit down and make some notes and figure out what of those, just those basic chords we talked about, the basic triads, the basic harmonies, and the basic complex chords we spoke of, and just work those out, you'll find that From there, you can start building complex waveforms and or complex, more complex structures from those chords that you know from what interval those chords can be played on. And also that you will see which ones can't. So you'll know that when you need to go out of key for some type of different feeling, or you're going to have to construct something differently because you're going to be out of key, or, you know, and how you can change things, or you've got this C major and what you could add to it. You know what I mean? You know, you can play the C major in the key of C, you know, and be in key, you know, right? That C major triad. What can you add to it? You can add a 6, you can add all these notes to it. But what can you add to it to make it sound good, that sounds cool? And why would you want to do that? You might be playing the C major, then you might play the F major and the G major. Then you might go to E minor and then D minor triad and then to A minor triad. I mean, you know, and what kind of other tones can you add to that to you know, build more complex structures from? And I laid it out that way because I hope that you play with it on the keyboard and in MuseScore, structuring those so you can see them on the keyboard, you can see them on the tablature and in the notation, and spend some time working on those. And you've got just very basic chords to work on, and what chords you can play where in that key from what intervals. And I hope I made that real clear and real simple and laid that out to you so that you can start working on that. And, you know, you'll find that a lot of times when you're improvising, that's those understandings, and when you're composing, that all of a sudden you're in A minor in the key of C, and what can you go to? Well, I can go to this E minor, and I know I can play an E minor, but I can also add this other tone to it that's not part of the E minor triad, but it's still in key. And that's a learning process. And I try to give you the simple structures so that you don't get lost in that. You know, I'm sitting here working, talk about 13th chords and 11th chords and all kinds of stuff, and, you know, an inverted 7th, you know, and, you know, it's, you know, turned upside down up your butt, you know, and I don't, you know, that's theory to the point to where it can just get really complex. You may want to go there and you may want to. We're trying to address theory so that you can address it to audio engineering, and you can address it to the recording, mixing, and mastering, and acoustics, because those understandings are going to really help you to put those two things together of why music is part of studying acoustics and how it pertains to it and what properties are pertinent in it, not just learning music and learning an instrument. So I hope I made that real clear, and I hope you have fun investigating that, and I hope you have fun looking around and seeing how you can take, you know, an E minor chord in the key of C and add something else to it. You know, you might be able to, I mean, what notes can you add to it to make it sound cool, you know, and, you know, things like that, you know, that are still playing in key, and understanding that you've just added, you know, played that E minor, and if you add some other note, what interval did you add to it? Does that make sense? Because you're going to have to look at it the same way as you're going from this root to the major third. You know, when you go to try to form a structure off that E, which is an interval of the key of C, that you're going to have to look at that as the root interval to build that chord. So you're going to go, you know, you've got, you know, whole step. Well, you can't going to get a major third there, so you're obviously going to have to play a minor third to play in key. And that concept right there, you digging around on that, is the fundamental concepts I'm trying to get you to understand, so that you can understand what that means to be playing in key, and to look around at those of what chords can be played in key, and at what interval those chords can be built, you know, at it still being in key. So I hope I made that real simple, and I hope I opened that door up for you to take that information to your keyboard and to your notation software there, MuseScore, and have some fun messing around with that and get a little bit better understanding of that. That way that, you know, that part of music theory starts to open up a little bit. Just be real careful. Focus on the basics that I was talking about, and the basic chords and the basic harmonies and the basic triads I spoke of. Later on, you can get more complex. Focus on those and understand where those can be played in that key of C. That way you can understand how they can play in another key. Peace, hope, love.